Welcome everybody to this side event from the Climate Adaptation Summit of EcoShape on paving the way for scaling investment in nature-based solutions on coast in emerging countries. That is quite a mouthful. I think we're going to talk predominantly about financing and accelerating implementation of nature-based solutions. We are doing that as EcoShape. EcoShape is a consortium of contractors, consultants, knowledge institutes, public partners and NGOs. And we're studying building with nature for over 12 years now. Building with nature is a design philosophy to create nature-based solutions in water infrastructure. And EcoShape is doing that via the conduction of pilot projects, fundamental research, as well as applied research. And one of these research teams has been focusing on business cases of building with nature. And it is with them that we're doing this side event. What are we going to do in the coming 30 minutes? We have external parties that will bring in some input and we will be discussing around the virtual table as we're doing this in the Corona times. So let me introduce the people that are at the table. First of all, I have Sien Kok, who is the project lead of EcoShape. She works at Deltares. Sien, could you further introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks Erik. So yeah, my name is Sien Kok. I work at the Knowledge Institute Deltares and I've been involved in a lot of projects that border on the economics of building with nature, of nature-based solutions. And the past years I've been focusing with EcoShape on the business case of these kind of solutions. That's me in a nutshell.
Right, well, thank you Sien, very welcome. Next to that we have Arthur Gleim from Rebel. Arthur, could you introduce yourself?
I'm from Rebel. Rebel is a finance advisor. We do invest ourselves as well in infrastructure projects, and we are specialized in development and financing of infrastructure in both the Western world and developing countries. And over the last years, we are also more focusing on implementing wise application of nature-based solutions.
Well, thank you, Arthur, and welcome. We also have at the table Dennis van Peppe from RVO. Dennis, could you introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Eric. Yes, my name is Dennis van Peppe, working for the Netherlands Enterprise and Development Agency, RVO in Dutch. RVO is an implementing agency for the Netherlands Ministry of Economic Affairs, Foreign Affairs, Water and Infrastructure. And we are a funder of scoping studies, feasibility studies and pilots in the area of building with nature. And we've been funding, among others, also the large-scale pilot project in Indonesia for EcoShape.
Yes, all right. Thank you, Dennis. And finally, Maurice de Kok from Van Noord. Could you introduce yourself, Maurice?
Yes, Erik, thanks for inviting me. I'm Maurice de Kok, working for a dredging contractor Van Noord in the Netherlands, working worldwide and often involved in port construction, coastal development projects. And we've been very active and being one of the founding fathers of EcoShape in, let's say, promoting the use of natural resources, because we all have a responsibility in making a better world for future generations.
Thank you, Maurice. So we have 4 experts that have had some involvement in financing or creating business cases for nature-based solutions. The 4 of you have also been seen and working on this white paper that we have developed. And Sien, maybe you could highlight a little bit further. What is this white paper about?
Yeah, thanks, Erik. Just a quick introduction indeed. I think there are many challenges facing the world today. And perhaps these are particularly evident in emerging economies. And it's very, I think we see it a lot. It's about biodiversity and nature decline around the world. We see climate change leading to weather extremes, sea level rise. And particularly in emerging economies, we see economic development along coasts. And all of this leads to increasing disaster risk, vulnerability. So I guess to address this issue, we need a lot of investment in protective infrastructure and also in conserving and restoring nature. But at the same time, we see there are investment gaps. So there's not enough funds available at the moment to meet these needs. In this context, building with nature presents a key opportunity. So by using this approach, when investing in infrastructure, we can address multiple challenges simultaneously. We limit adverse effects of regular infrastructure, and it can also be more cost effective in some cases. But at the same time, in practice, we see that despite increasing interest and ambitions, investment levels are very limited, and most of the funds for infrastructure development are still geared towards conventional solutions. In this white paper that we've written, we have thought about how can we redirect those conventional funds, how can we attract new funds, just in general, how can we use more investments, scale up investments in building with nature. And that's what we'll be talking about today, some of the key barriers, key enablers in scaling up this investment.
So, our first video is from Dolores Hipolito. She is a project manager at the Flood Control Management Cluster at the Department of Public Works and Highways from the Philippines. Please see her contribution.
In the Philippines, barriers in public infrastructure on building with nature approach include infrastructure development is geared to support economic growth, so appraisal of investments focuses on capital expenditure with economic and social benefits, often disregarding intangible benefits. Coastal infrastructure focuses on protecting lives, properties, and infrastructures. And there are several agencies and local government units with jurisdiction and mandate in the coastal area. Some initiatives of the Department of Public Works and Highways related to this approach are adoption of retarding basin for riverine floods and use of mangroves for breakwater effect in coastal areas. Stakeholders are engaged for their concerns and support. Use of coconut bioengineering solutions in projects to support indigenous technologies and generate employment in the countryside. And recently, inclusion of nature-based solutions in river basin flood risk management studies. For investment in building with nature approach in coastal management, there is a need to develop policies and strategies to mainstream building with nature approach in infrastructure planning and design, such as integrated coastal management and the use of local materials and technologies. Identify stakeholders and consult them in the development of coastal infrastructures. Harmonize projects and financial investments in the coastal area. With varying programs and priority criteria, building consensus among the stakeholders is a big challenge. So, what strategies or measures could really work?
So, when looking to this video, I think in summary, we could say that Dolores highlights that investments really focus on those sectors where there are tangible results, basically where the GDP directly benefits from the investment. And that's choosing for nature-based solution and building with nature is difficult, as the side benefits seem to be secondary to the primary benefits. An integrated approach could work towards this.
I think it's a fair point to say that that there are many benefits with building with nature, and that at the same time there's a small group paying for the solutions. So in assessing projects and in weighing project alternatives, I think it should be done by applying a value-based approach, where you not only look at the direct benefits like coastal protection, but also towards other benefits, such as strengthening of the ecosystems, such as, for example, more opportunities for fisheries and recreation. And when doing so, you identify more beneficiaries to the projects. And I think when certain stakeholders recognize the benefits of building with nature, they will be more inclined to get involved and more inclined to also pay part of the bill.
Okay, so I hear you saying, when we create a value-based approach, more values come into play and more stakeholders become involved and become attached to that. But I think Dolores' question was really focused also on how do you get consensus to these various stakeholders. And I think, Dennis, you would like to respond to that.
Yeah, because indeed, and it adds to what Arthur says. So Arthur already also said it in a way, but I think designing the process of designing a process of actually designing a good building with nature project is very important, and that process should be very inclusive. So I very much believe in inclusive co-creation. So right from the start, even before a solution has been developed, I think together with the local community, sitting around the table, drawing up the different possibilities, looking at local livelihoods, taking into consideration local knowledge, right from the start, throughout the whole process of design of the intervention. I think that's key, and for that you need a very good process design.
Okay, so it's all about process design. Sien.
Yeah, maybe just play a little bit the advocate of the devil. This also sounds like a very timely, like a lengthy process to do this right. And I think that's also probably one of the key barriers, right? There's a lot of incentive to start building because there's a need. So I think we do need to recognize that if we do want to have building with nature approaches, this does take a more elaborate process in getting it off the ground. And we also need to reserve enough funds and time to really go through this project process in the right way. And I guess that's also something that the international finance institutes can help with when they support the development of these kind of projects.
Yeah, so it's really you're highlighting the time effect that's necessary to create this process. Maybe Maurice, you can highlight from a contractor's perspective. Do you also see this certain rush to get construction going?
This is absolutely, I think what Sien just said is for me one of the key issues that we often face. Time is running. People who are elected would like to show the end result before their period is over. So yes, time is absolutely important. And what we try to do and what we've learned from the past decades is the earlier we get involved, we call it early contractor involvement, also the more stakeholders you can, let's say, make part of your project, and then if we listen carefully, we understand the various benefits for the various stakeholders, and then you come in the end to a better solution. I mean, when I started my career 30 years ago, I only started talking to the client. Now we have at least 10 to 15 clients for the same project, and I think that is absolutely a positive way of, let's say, improving a future project. But it's time consuming, and there's a downside to this. I fully agree with the Sien.
Okay,
well,
so
the other side is that if you don't consult them, then you will have the discussion afterwards, and then still it takes time.
Arthur, absolutely correct. We've had, let's say, in the past bad experiences because one of the stakeholders who was not consultant really was against the project, and then the whole process of execution is being delayed, and that's even more costly. So yeah, fair comment.
And let's not forget that in any infrastructure project, even if it's grey, you also need to go through this process. Let's not forget. So let's not say that this is only necessary for green infrastructure.
No, correct.
I guess what makes it maybe for building with nature a little bit complex is that it's also so innovative, right? So we need to work across different actor constellations that have not been traditionally geared in the regular way of working in infrastructure development. So it's also that whole part of building new partnerships, finding new people to work with that I imagine is quite a complex barrier for Dolores and her colleagues.
Yeah, and also convincing local stakeholders that the green solution is actually just as beneficial and just as protective as the grey infrastructure, traditional grey infrastructure solution that is often provided. You will need to invest in convincing people that they're also safe with the green infrastructure.
yeah, all right. So if I hear this around the table correctly, I hear about inclusion and making sure that people are sufficiently convinced that say their values are taken on board in the construction, and then when we do a value-based approach, we can highlight the side benefits as well, and then probably these people are willing to sort of chip into the project, whether that is in funding or whether that is with cooperation or whether that is in smoothing the development process. That's sort of in the open. Then we're going on to the next video. So in this next movie, we will see Johan Garderes from Rebel interviewing Boris van Zanten. And he is a nature-based solution and disaster risk management specialist at the World Bank. Let's see this movie.
Hello, dear viewers and listeners. I have here with me Boris van Zenten, nature-based solutions expert and environmental economist at the World Bank. At EcoShape, we believe that one of the obstacles for the implementation of nature-based solutions is the lack of hard and reliable data on the cost and effectiveness of nature-based solutions in concrete applications. What is your view on the role of information and data in the concrete development of nature-based solutions?
We've learned a lot in terms of data on the cost and effectiveness over the past years, but we need still to better understand these inherent uncertainties around nature-based solutions to better serve our clients in different contexts and locations.
What should be done to collect the right information and get them to decision makers?
We basically have a theory of change or an approach that consists of three main components. So we try to collect a body of experts in different fields that are relevant for nature-based solutions that we can deploy to the teams that can support them with these context specific estimates for pre-feasibility studies in the region, for example. Then we are working on the development of rapid assessment tools with like geospatial data, satellite data that's becoming increasingly available at higher resolutions to be able to do kind of a rapid assessment of the suitability of different nature-based solutions in different locations. And then third, we try to learn from the studies, the feasibility studies, the technical studies that we do to kind of further develop the existing methodologies and mature methodologies to come up with more standardized methodologies for specific nature-based solutions.
Thank you very much, Boris, for your comments, and also thanks to you, viewers, for your attention.
So, if I summarize, then I see that Boris van Zanten actually makes two important points. One is on these inherent uncertainties of building with nature or nature-based solutions. They ask more space, they are dependent on conditions. But my question with that is, say, aren't we too much focused on inherent uncertainties in nature-based solutions? Aren't all the coastal designs inherently uncertain, and are we just more used to uncertainties related to grey infrastructure than to those of green infrastructure? What do you have to say about that?
Now, Erik, if I may.
Yes, please, Maurice, go ahead.
As a contractor, it's our business to manage risks. So for me, any project, be it a green or grey project, is full with risks. So you have to be very open and clear about it. What are the risks that we will face, and how can we deal with them? And yes, there are challenges, and there may be a few uncertainties that we have not experienced in the past, but there are so many uncertainties to each project that we have to deal with. So I don't see a big difference between the various projects that we execute, either being a grey or green.
If I may add to that, Maurice and Eric, I think what we need to realize for any project, also grey infrastructure, but especially nature-based solutions, that we need to invest in research in advance. We need to invest in research in local conditions, physical conditions, social conditions, cultural conditions even. And once we decide on a project and implement it, we need to invest also in monitoring over the long term. And often in grey infrastructure, you see that the investment takes place, but monitoring doesn't happen. But as for green infrastructure, it will be very important to monitor the evaluation of the intervention over the course of time to see whether it is still sufficient and whether it meets the conditions. And I think doing that, you can mitigate a lot of the risks that are involved with nature-based solutions.
Dennis, if I may add, Dennis, thanks for the input, very valuable, because we have a big example now here in the Netherlands, the SAND engine, that was built in 2011-12, and when we have kept on monitoring, even today, so we have now 10 years of data available, and we have now proof in the data that indeed this green solution is at least as safe as a grey solution would have been. And it has provided a lot more socioeconomic benefits, it has got recreational benefits, and absolutely a positive effect for the Dutch coast and the Dutch people.
Well, the challenge here is that nature-based solutions for local authorities are often once in a lifetime, so there is little experience. And also for the financiers, it is still a black box.
Yeah, but that's my point, because I hear you all saying about it's the inherent uncertainties, it's the sort of the black box. But I think in the end, the main thing when we are contributing to this is the biggest black box is, of course, climate change in itself.
I'd like to add something to that, Erik, if I may.
Yeah. Please.
I mean, you're absolutely right. In the end, climate change is going to affect the infrastructure that we have today, the places where we don't have infrastructure, and also the green infrastructure. And I think, as Boris correctly said, is one of the big advantages of building with nature is that it's dynamic. So it will probably do better under changing circumstances than great infrastructure. It's just that this benefit is not ingrained in our decision-making practice, right? We don't usually look beyond the 20 to 30-year horizon, whereas beyond that time, those benefits will really materialize. So I think that would be really valuable to include the long-term resilience of our investments into our decision-making. Maybe coming back to that earlier point, I also think that when we look at the certainties that we have and the knowledge that we have, and it's growing, like we heard from Boris and Maurice, we have decades of we're running behind great infrastructure, right? We have had decades to work on experiences and knowledge in that front. So to scale up, we indeed, like Dennis said, we need to monitor every project, but we also need to share that knowledge. So I'm really happy to hear of all of those projects from the World Bank, and I would be really enthusiastic if we could somehow bring all of that knowledge together, so everyone can make use of it. Like we say, like this is a once in a lifetime project for many of the coastal authorities. So we need those experiences from elsewhere to help us.
Fully agree.
Okay, and that brings me to the next point that Boris made in his statement. Sorry, Arthur, to cut you off there, but Boris also highlighted three main points in ways to bring this further. And may I ask to you, which of these three would you think is most key?
I think there is a fourth one, and that is that the World Bank and similar institutes should value building with nature solutions by paying for the extra cost of the project development in the period that it is still novel for local authorities. I think it's very important, and that could catalyze on a much more public funds, but also private finance available for this line of business.
I think it's important that we build this global community for green infrastructure, for nature-based solutions, to have experts and like-minded people connecting to each other, and also use that group to spread the message and to build capacities all over the world, and build knowledge on nature-based solutions and building with nature all over the world, so that we can increase the chances of applying nature-based solutions in many more places than we do now. Because I do feel that we often first look at grey infrastructure solution before green infrastructure solutions, and you only achieve looking more at green infrastructure if you have people that have knowledge about that and that are willing to apply it and are willing to look for possibilities of applying it.
Quite clear. So when I close this section off, we've been discussing about the inherent uncertainties of green infrastructure or nature-based solutions, and we've sort of highlighted that these might not be that different from grey infrastructure unless that we haven't come across them that often. So spreading the message and creating that community that is able to deal with these is actually key in understanding and putting this forward. And we've heard about the World Bank that they've highlighted a couple of points in order to bring this further. And I think as EcoShape we're contributing to this as well. And in our next movie, we have George Beukering, and he is Director of Capital Raising and Business Development at Climate Fund Managers. And he will provide an input on private capital investment in nature-based solutions.
My name is George Beukering. I'm Director for Capital Raising and Business Development at Climate Fund Managers. We do come across building with nature solutions in our portfolio. basically across the spectrum of pure building with nature solutions, but also as part of other sort of more normal grey infrastructure projects. And we are willing to play a role in both type projects. An example of a pure nature-based solution could be a project that we're currently undertaking in Africa and Latin America, which are debt for nature swaps, which is primarily aimed at protecting high biodiversity value marine areas. But we're also looking at, for example, wind farms that have a mangrove element in it, so that we can create an impact on biodiversity while combining it with a normal service like the production of renewable energy. These type of projects could become more attractive for us if governments were willing and able to use existing business models and proven business models from other sectors. For example, in the renewable energy sector, it is very customary for governments to take power off over a longer period of time against a predetermined price. And that works very well for that sector. If governments were willing to do the same and were willing, for example, to provide a capacity payment or an availability payment for a developer that was willing to invest, say again, in a mangroves forest and provide services that are derived from mangrove forest to that country, it would be easier for financiers and investors like us to make that long-term capital investment. The role of the private sector and of financiers in general, I think, is twofold. First of all, we can be quite innovative in creating both financial and societal and environmental returns to our stakeholders. And we're usually also quite good and efficient implementers. So once given a task, once given a budget, and once given a timeline, the private sector often, not always, often is very well able to implement a project. Again, in two forms, I would say. Again, if there was a desire to do more nature-based solutions projects, and I think there is definitely that desire, currently the market best suited for that is still the carbon market. If the carbon market was able to increase in size, and also if the price for carbon credits could increase, say, from $15 per ton to $60 per ton, a lot more project could become commercially viable. But also there's a very strong willingness from inside climate fund managers and our investors to incorporate port development and coastal defense projects and other types of nature-based solutions in our projects, also where the primary role is normal infrastructure services like water supply, waste treatment, or other types of grey infrastructure.
So that was really interesting. So what I took away from this is that, say, the long-term capital investment from the private sector requires more certainty in the income streams that are behind it. Blue carbon was mentioned, carbon funding, but also how maybe nature swaps can take place and create an impact on biodiversity. So what do we think about that? Certainty in income streams. Arthur, would you have an opinion on it?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea to introduce more private sector participation in this sector. It's still not yet there, and I would like to motivate the local authorities to enter into public-private partnerships with the private sector and with private financiers. You introduce more market initiative. You introduce more innovative solutions, and you're able to introduce more private finance that enables you to bring the projects forward. The government then pays an annual availability payment if the private sector is able to live up to their promises and the services that they agreed upon.
I understand correctly. I think the role of the private sector in this is that we need them both to finance these projects, pre-finance these projects. So at the project level, indeed, we can look for ways that they can work with us in PPPs. We can also look at it at a sort of higher level. So, for example, by creating those blue or green bonds from governmental projects, so we can crowd in that private finance. But at another level, I think we also need them not only for pre-financing our project, but also just as co-investment. And I think, it was also mentioned in the video message that there's an opportunity here to look for cash flows from these projects. For example, by the co-benefits created by these projects, like carbon capture, which we can then sell for carbon credits. But of course, this is a market that is still not very developed yet. And we need help in developing this market, not only on the knowledge side, there's a lot of knowledge questions, but definitely also on the regulatory side. So making sure that those income streams materialize and are sufficient to be really attractive. And maybe to conclude, I think that there's also a task for us here, for the project developer sector, to make effort in doing this. So look beyond our sort of conventional investment structures and actively reach out to local stakeholders and stakeholders from the financial sector to cooperate and find those co-investment opportunities.
Yeah, very good point. I think if you look, for example, in India, the mangroves are very important for fishery and fish production. It's worth over $1 billion annually. It's almost 25% of the total fishery production of India. So for example, there should be a willingness to pay for the restoration of the mangrove systems and strengthen their potential for coastal production at the same time.
Interesting. So we are really stating, so the main part of the infrastructure always remains a public good, and we can sort of attract finance from the market via bonds or via green bonds or via other ways of creating this finance solution. But we are also really looking for these co-investment streams by making use of the co-benefits. That's what I hear you say. Maurice, do you already notice that as a contractor, that these co-benefits are being rewarded?
Oh, Erik, more and more are being rewarded. I mean, we are very used in the Netherlands with the, let's say, evaluation of offers by ENVI, and in English called it MEET, the most economic advantage solution. So to have not only looking at the price level, but also the quality level of the solution. And the quality also includes the socio-economic quality, the environmental quality, and the quality, for example, for people in that environment who work and live there. So then, indeed, like we stated in the beginning, all the stakeholders who benefit can also become, let's say, you can approach them and engage them.
Yeah, exactly. So in the beginning, I spoke about co-creation, inclusive co-creation, and that also includes the finance sector, donors, local authorities, and national authorities. Have them on board right from the start. Look at the different ways of procurement and development and co-benefits and financial streams when developing an intervention. Have them on board, and not only at the end when the solution has been developed or intervention has been developed. But yes, there's definitely something that should be part of the whole process.
Yeah. All right. I think that nicely concludes our discussion and makes this very round. We've seen 3 movies in which particular aspects were highlighted. On the one hand, we saw that there's a tendency for public investments to work towards those type of infrastructures that create most direct benefits, and therefore obviously overlook sometimes side benefits that nature-based solutions can create. In the second video, we've seen that there's uncertainties, the inherent uncertainties that are there, whether nature-based solutions indeed create this value, and that we feel more certain that grey infrastructure does that. But we've highlighted that, say, on the long run, the flexibility and the adaptability of nature-based solutions might sort of catch up with that and create that. But then in the end, we've seen that, say, for the large investment needed for climate adaptation, we have seen that it's necessary to include private finance into the mix and get sort of a blended finance model. But it is quite difficult to attract these private capital investments because there is less certainties of incomes. And maybe indeed the side benefits are the way to actually create additional revenue streams and create these sources of income. So that sort of makes this a nicely sort of a rounded discussion. May I thank you, all four of the panel, for your lively discussions. I think it was really interesting to see your different point of views and your different the different inputs that you've gave. I think it sort of highlighted the importance. And may I thank you, the viewer, as well, for joining us this afternoon. And please be aware of our white paper that is launched today, the EcoShape white paper on paving the way for scaling investments in nature-based solutions along coasts in emerging countries. It talks about financing and accelerating implementation of nature-based solutions, applying building with nature more, and hopefully this starts up the discussion so that we come to further implementation. Please visit www.ecoshape.org for more information, to download the white paper, or to find more materials on the business case of nature-based solutions. For now, I thank you very much, and I hope you've enjoyed this afternoon with me as well.